Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to discuss the exile. The exile is a crucial element in the Jewish story. Historically, we were exiled from the Promised Land, from Israel. And individually, inwardly, this mirrors how we are exiled from God, from our source, from the truth of who we are. I want to speak about this exile because the Jewish religion as we know it is a religion of exile. It has been formed from exile. Another way of describing exile would be to use the words trauma. Judaism has been formed from a trauma. There have been many traumas in Jewish history, but the one that I am referring to, which is of note because the religion solidified around it, is the destruction of the temple and the Jewish way of life in Israel by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago. There have been previous exiles, but this one we never recovered from. This one lasted so long that our whole sense of identity, our whole sense of who we are as a nation and our religion solidified around this exile. So instead of knowing ourselves as God's people who are here to be a light unto the nations, we primarily have known ourselves as the neglected, the forgotten, the victimized, the cast out. And we have acted accordingly. So what does it look like to be in exile? This can be observed in the individual as with the nation of Israel. We, the collective we, went into our heads to deal with the trauma of being so wounded and disconnected from the land and our source. And we created a very intellectual tradition, one that has a lot of wisdom, as well as a certain level of logical insanity that comes with an overactive mind. And the body and the heart, which is also represented by the woman, were forgotten. Were disallowed. This is a very serious understanding to come by. Because when we recognize that we were looking through, for example, a twisted scope, then we know that our straight aim will undoubtedly miss the mark. But at least now we can say we know, and therefore we can start strengthening, start compensating for that unbalance intentionally. We can recognize that the glasses we've been wearing have been glasses of trauma, and have seen the world and therefore repeatedly experienced things in a certain way akin to that way that we are perceiving everything, through the lenses of trauma, through the lenses that something terrible could happen, might happen. How many Jewish people, for instance, have issues around food, and they've never lacked food in their whole life, and so on. Issues about not having enough. And it just so happens that the Jewish trauma, the Jewish neurotic, unbalanced adaptions to deal with that trauma, work in our unbalanced society. And people might say, wow, look at the Jewish people, they're doing so well, they're so successful, but they're just as hurting, just as wounded. But even worse, perhaps they think that's normal. They think that's okay because they're still able to be considered successful. So that's a problem. It might not be considered a problem if your goal is to live a normal life and make a certain amount of money, so forth. But it's definitely a problem if you're going to be a light unto the nations. It's definitely a problem if you're going to be connected to God. It's definitely a problem if you're going to feel the inner joy and freedom of being open-hearted and integrated in ourselves. So this is what I'm here to speak about, to remind us of where we are wounded, so that we can recognize the steps we need to take for our healing to occur. But for this reminder to have any meaningful impact, it needs to come from the place of knowing who we are, which is not wounded, knowing what we've come for, which is not to repeat the old stories, knowing that God has never abandoned us, that the living God is breathing through us, scintillating with every cell. An ocean we can just immerse in, fully immerse in. Always. So I have a secret to share with you. The temple wasn't destroyed. It just seemed that way. I have a secret to share with you. That you did not die. It just seemed that way. For everything that is physical, that has a physical life in this world, is but a tip of the iceberg for the great spiritual existence that it has. This is true for each one of us. This is true for the temple too. The temple on high so beautiful, so big. At one point, way back, and I remember because I was there, way back, the spiritual temple and the physical temple were together. The spirit was embodied fully in the physical. the situation changed, and it no longer served a higher purpose. It no longer was possible for the spiritual to be embodied in that very small, relatively speaking, limited form. It's like a lantern that when it's on the ground only has a limited radius of light. When it's raised high, the light shines further, much further. And so it was seen that the temple structure, the small, limited temple that came with a certain dogma and tradition, was shattered, so that the bigger light that it contained would be free to shine for the whole world. Now, that light has grown in such a way that if it were possible to build something that could hold even a little part of it, it would have to be so big and beautiful, so open to all people, all traditions, so devoid of any dogma, so connected to the awareness of the light that is coming through. But for now, the temple is in the spiritual realm, shining on us, waiting for a space. And it's not a space from a structure, it's a space from the peace and the consciousness that we hold inside, the love we have, and the care and the connection that we have to be embodied again. For this healing to happen, and it's not just about the temple, it's about the land that was ravaged, the millions taken in slavery, so much suffering, and the whole tradition and religion of disconnection that ensued from that. For this healing to take place, we need to know who we are. We need to know that we are made in the image of God. That we are immortal beings. Passing through these bodies temporarily. That the strength of God, the love of God, the light of God, the healing of God is with us, in us. And with that understanding, we can hold that part of us that says, God, where are you? Why so much suffering? So much horror from the Romans, from the Poles, from the Russians, from the Germans, and every nation that turned against us. For whatever pain, for whatever reason that is theirs. But our concern is the pain, the disconnection inside ourselves. That's what we must hold with love, with forgiveness, with understanding. So when that voice, the child, says, God, where are you? Why is life so hard? You can answer and say, I am right here, right now. I am with you. I welcome your questions or comments. May you have a blessed day. Until next time.